Hello, everybody, and welcome to Gallery Teachers Masterclass. My name is Steve Hirschhorn, and this workshop is called The Challenge of Challenge. You know, when I started teaching in the mid to late 80s, I was always interested to hear the motivation of new teachers going into their training. The answers revealed a lot, as I suppose answers should. Initially, I took what they said. Perhaps I jotted it down, and then later on I started to think about what all these answers actually meant. One of the things that I wanted to know was why they decided to go into teaching. And since my own journey was complicated, this was my third career, so I became more and more interested in their responses. And quite high on the list of these was money. Also, a change of career, travel the world, and help people. Now let's look at these one by one, starting with making money. Now, there's not a lot of money in language teaching, and we all know that. Even the big names in our industry, in our profession, are not sitting in luxury, unless, of course, they manage to write a series of course books, which every student and every teacher has used, and now sit in every dusty cupboard of every language school all over the world. You know what I'm talking about. So money was not, I think, a very relevant reason for going into teaching. The change of career was a common answer from people who've been working in a given profession for years and decided there must be more to life than that. I recall bankers, nurses, architects, teachers, who are always the most difficult to train, I have to say, musicians, a makeup artist, and a Hansard shorthand note taker. That's from the Houses of Parliament in London. There are also many from the armed forces for whom I worked specifically for some years at NATO bases in Germany. They had their training courses paid as part of their resettlement arrangement from the UK government. But there are also military folk from other NATO nations who trained to teach English. Now, travel seemed like a pretty good reason. After all, whether or not we think it's a positive feature of our world, English is required in most areas of the globe. So as a teacher, you have the chance to go from Argentina to Abu Dhabi, from Sweden to Suriname, from Portugal to Panama. I'll stop there, you get my drift. And then to the ubiquitous and seemingly innocuous, I want to help people. Okay, at first glance, this seems admirable, doesn't it? I mean, altruistic and socially aware. I want to help people who are perhaps in need of my skills and knowledge to further their careers or indeed to better their lives. Furthermore, I want to do the job properly and will therefore undertake some serious training. Now, it took me a while to dismantle and understand the real implications of this initial position for a new teacher. Let me explain. Help is a unifaceted quality. It's one-sided. You can help someone cross the road, since it's clear that they're unable to do so alone. You can help a drowning person by jumping in and pulling them out of the water or throwing them some buoyancy aid. You can help an injured animal by taking it to the vet or by nursing it yourself, and so on. There are surely a million ways to help, but they all involve taking control of the situation to guide, lead, push, lift, manage, and otherwise take over. See where I'm going? You can take someone's arm to help them across the road, and in so doing, you've taken control and achieved something which your helpee, that's the word I've just invented, could not have done alone, or at least might have done, but slowly and dangerously. So there's also an assumption that you are better able better equipped to do the task, whatever it is, than the person you're helping. They can't do it. I can, and so I will. And then you, the recipient, will be better off than before. Perhaps I'm being a little harsh, but I want to highlight an alternative underlying psychology supporting the notion of helping. The heart may well be in the right place, the woke and socially aware, feeding the poor, assisting the homeless, donating to charities, volunteering, and so on, giving back, in short. And at the same time, feeling a sense of warmth and satisfaction at having done something worthwhile. I get that completely. But as a teacher, you can't learn your students. You can't take over the process your students are undertaking. Help in a teaching learning context should involve a completely different mindset, not doing the job your students are supposed to be doing, but making available the tools for them to work more effectively, which leads me really to the title of this session, The Challenge of Challenge. Okay, look, I want to go back a little bit to build up a picture of traditional teaching of almost everything, not just language. It's been a matter of teachers standing at the front of a rows of desks, telling people things and having them supposedly remember them. Often motivation was provided in the form of punishment, sometimes corporal. I know, I suffered from it. A sharp rap on the knuckles with a ruler by the passing teacher when one was daydreaming, which incidentally has been shown to be quite useful for developing one's creativity, or some verbal abuse designed to force one to work harder or indeed work at all. At the extreme end, parents might be informed, or a head teacher or a teacher wielded a cane to reinforce the notion that the responsibility for learning was yours, and quite unwittingly reinforcing the fact that the teacher too was in effect failing, right? But if learners are not learning, whose fault is that really? Okay, so that's a controversial question, but I've always held and hold that new teachers, and told new teachers that if students succeed, it's their own merit. But if they fail, it's the teacher's fault. Tough, right? And probably a conclusion which is really far more complex than I've made it. But my purpose was, in fact, to shock and stimulate actual thought, which I think it did and maybe still does. Now, this idea of student responsibility is really interesting, since in the 20th and 21st centuries, we've focused more and more on this idea. Responsibility for learning is the students. Caleb Gattegno, who, as many of you know, I held in high regard, while not necessarily agreeing with every single thing he ever said or did, had this idea close to the top of his list of educational principles. However, he and we no longer feel the need to beat or abuse our students, since we know that there are other more humane and, more importantly, more effective ways to stimulate and motivate. We have the obligation to create the contexts in which learning is most likely to take place. That is super important. We teachers are paid, not very much, but we are paid to do our best to build a safe, secure, comfortable, and affective environment in which our learners can function to the best of their ability. That's the job. There are so many important, essential even, bits in those two sentences that I can't stress them enough. This is the fundament. This is where we begin, where we end, and where we succeed or fail. If you agree with this, then we're on the same page as a starting point. If you don't agree, I'll be happy to hear what it is you disagree with, and we can shout at each other or discuss it further. The question then, which then arises, must be, how do we create this magical learning experience, this ideal context in which happy learners soak up every weighty concept we offer? Well, let's be real. It's never going to be like that. It's going to be a messy and sometimes utterly unpredictable continuum of success, failure, and doubt. Teachers who say things like X really works, or this is what I do and it always works, are, and I put this politely, talking rubbish. If there was a foolproof way to teach language which always succeeded, we'd all be doing that, and I wouldn't be here, neither would you. We'd all be on the beach or enjoying ourselves somewhere. There'd be no need whatsoever for teacher conferences or professional associations, professional development sessions like this one, because we'd know how to do it. We know how to do what we do, and we would do it. But we don't, and we don't. Half the time, we're guessing, and the other half, we're experimenting based on colleagues' advice, teachers' books, and bits and pieces picked up in workshops and professional development events. So in the creation of this ideal environment, as far as one is able to create that at all, let's start with Krashen's affective filter hypothesis. This suggests that if learners are less than comfortable and safe, learning will not be optimized. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but this seems to be as good a reason as any, combined with our already more humane educational views, to invest time, thought, and energy in creating a space in which our students can feel at home or better. The components of such a space include student and parental, in this case for young learners, attitude. Included also our institutional support and understanding. The physical area, furniture and its distribution, lighting, temperature, and so on. And then the teacher's manner, attitude, voice tone, body language, approach, and to some extent, course materials. It's a bit like a Maslow hierarchy, since if something basic is absent from this list, it would seem that the rest of the components are less likely to reach fruition without exceptional compensation from elsewhere. I'm sure that you can think of more components to add, but this is a start. This is a basic notion. Now, I've visited classrooms all over the world, from Peru to Japan, China, Europe, all over the place. And some are basic, little more than a noisy box with no heating, rickety chairs and tables, and certainly no modern equipment. But somehow teachers manage to create a unique atmosphere in those spaces. Not all, but many. I've met them and I've seen them in action. This suggests that my ideal list cited above may be just that, an ideal, but not essential. It also suggests that the positive manner and attitude of the teacher are in fact essentials, not optional choices. So my notion of challenge is nothing to do with students having to put up with a poor or substandard physical environment. It's nothing to do with students managing to succeed despite their lazy, out-of-date teacher. And it's nothing to do with course materials which were written 50 years ago. Instead, my notion of challenge is about an aware, focused, and dedicated teacher using her skills to get students to do more than they thought they could. There, I've said it. Challenge is almost the opposite of helping. It's demonstrating to students that they can do it, even though they don't know it. Challenge in this context involves stepping out of the way and letting students find their own problem-solving methods. It involves offering minimal cues and clues to assist the students' processes. This is the teacher's job. It means gauging quickly and efficiently what a learner needs to get where he or she wants to be, and then having the wherewithal to provide it instantly. Now let's start looking at some practical techniques and ideas designed both for language teaching environments and also teacher development sessions, since there's no better way to pass on ideas than to use those ideas in what is commonly known as a feedback loop. I used to start teacher training and also language class sessions by asking everyone to introduce themselves. Nothing odd or challenging in that, I hear you say. But I didn't ask anyone in particular to start nor continue. I simply sat in silence and waited. There was nervous shuffling. People don't like silence. There were people looking at each other. There was even giggling. But eventually, someone would pick up the challenge and begin. After that, others would take the baton without being told or directed to do so. This was the start of a process of understanding that a teacher need not, indeed in my view should not, be in control of all that happens, and yet is providing the context for self-determination. For language students, in particular younger ones, this was a revelation, since many were used to a teacher who took absolute control, guiding and determining all that happens, ordering all that happens, who speaks, who answers and when, how they arrange their furniture, and so on. The freedom to realize that one can move, one can stand up, one can decide not to speak or to answer, to ask questions, to express understanding, or the opposite, takes a while to develop, but it's so worth it. New teachers, too, often express their satisfaction in this more flexible way, which enabled them to work outside the constraints of a traditional classroom. I recall standing in the doorway of the education center on a NATO base in Germany in the days when I smoked. Oh, I'm glad I don't now. And a car screeched to a halt. A door was flung open. And this big chap, he was an ex-sergeant major who I had trained some months earlier, came running towards me and hugged me to death. "You changed my life," he said. "I understand now that there's another way to get people to do things other than shouting at them." Now that for me was not only a relief that he hadn't killed me, but also a success story. To summarize what I've been saying here, break the rules, remove the boundaries, and shock people into taking control of their own space. I mean, shock in a positive way, obviously. Now let's look at another area of traditional teacher overreach. Students need or want to do some dialogue work in pairs, perhaps, and maybe reading from a course book. In general, what happens here is that teachers nominate who should work with them, or who should work with whom, but also when they can speak. So you end up with a sterile classroom in which two people are speaking, perhaps even being made to stand to do it. Everyone else is supposed to be listening. Oh, God, I hate this stuff. Let's turn that completely on its head. First, get students to work with whoever they wish. I say something like, find someone you like to work with and sit by them. That's it, nothing more is needed. Students will stand, move, chat, be human, and eventually sit down ready for the next instruction. Yeah, instructions are necessary, even in this perhaps enlightened classroom. Now look, even young learners can do this. There'll be a bit of confusion for a while, but that's okay. They are human, even though they're small. Next, assuming you're not having students just read from a course book, ask them to either write together or speak together in a role play type activity. Typically, I might say, one of you is a shoe shop seller and the other one wants to buy some shoes. Something like that. I then use an established convention to get them to work together. This is index finger of each hand pointing it at each other. But I hear you say you can't hear what they're doing. Kind of right. But then why should I? Why should I? I'm creating an environment in which learners can ask each other, and if necessary, me for help. Also, you'll be amazed at how much you pick up by sitting down somewhere in the room and watching what happens in these situations. This is monitoring from a distance. Students can surprise you. They can turn from nervous speakers afraid of being judged and corrected to being fluent speakers, unlike me, because they're actually engaged in a private process with a peer. I'm not saying they'll be magically 100% accurate, but that's not the aim, is it? You will, I predict, also be able to pick up some egregious errors for later focus, as well as hesitation and knowledge gaps, which you can also address later on. How does that work? Well, when they've all finished, ask each pair questions about what they did. So get into the role play. Who was selling? Okay, how was your customer? Did they ask for a discount? Elicit adjectives and adverbs. Right, and what were you looking for? Kind of shoe lexes, color, size, and so on. And did you get what you wanted? And how much were they? Do you think that was a good price? all this designed to add value to the job they've done and also to expose any gaps which we can work on. You might decide to elicit part or all of the dialogue to the whiteboard or blackboard. Make sure, but be sure, that what ends up on the whiteboard comes from them, not from you. I might ask, how did you start? Or what's the first thing you said? And then as I rise up to the board, I might ask, what's the next word? Or how do you spell brogues? And so on, constantly engaging them. If they get something wrong, I have two possible ways to respond. One is to simply wait while they work out what it should be, and the other is to ask a direct question. We'll come back to that in a moment. In any case, I want to keep everyone involved and engaged. Having written up this short dialogue, maybe 10 lines maximum, I ask them if they want to write it down, if they want to copy it down. And as they say yes, and prepare to copy the dialogue, I run a board eraser diagonally through the dialogue so that they can't simply copy, but have to ask each other and work together to recreate what is written. This is challenge. Let's move on a little to the inevitable asking the teacher. Assuming one's classroom has an atmosphere conducive to asking questions, interrupting and feeling free to delve, we can expect questions addressed to us, the teacher. My response is almost never to answer directly, but choose from a menu of possible reactions. Here are some of them. What do you think? This is designed to elicit an opinion or a view, and quite often is the answer the learner needed. So they already knew very often. I might also ask, can anyone help? This engages the whole group and trains learners to listen to each other. Sometimes someone will say they haven't heard the question, and I've seen teachers repeat the question, but what we need to do is ask the student to repeat. I might also point to a colleague nearby and say, ask Mario, he knows. This is showing faith and trust in learners to resolve their own problems without me. It also, of course, boosts Mario's confidence because I'm putting faith in the fact that he probably knows. All of these are forms of challenge, and all of them have encapsulated within them the notion that you can do this without me, and I trust you to do so. Almost always, they come up with satisfactory answers to the original question, and if they don't, that's okay. We can open up the point for further examination. Now, these things might seem rather academic and perhaps require a good deal of maturity from the students, but they are conventions which I've used with all age groups, 7 years old upwards. So all you need to do is believe that your students can do it. Teachers say to me, but how can they answer if they don't know? But you don't know if they know or not. The other massive area in which challenge must figure is, of course correction, or error management, as I prefer to call it. Note that I'm not differentiating between error and mistake, since the cause is quite irrelevant to my purposes of having learners make themselves more intelligible in the new language. I'm not going to discuss when such error management might take place here. Rather, I want to look at how challenge is integrated into the process. If by chance you've read my book, Dealing with the Questionnaire Rods, you'll have a pretty good idea what I'm going to say now. So let's start with a couple of do's and don'ts. Don't discourage errors. I saw a post on the Facebook group the other day in which a teacher was saying they try to minimize errors. But when students make a language error, they're doing you an enormous favor, since they're opening a window onto the state of their interlanguage. The interlanguage, of course, is the language that exists between L1 and L2. They're telling you where you have failed or where they have yet to discover. And in either case, your job is pretty much the same. The second don't is the ubiquitous, we did this last week, banish this, throw it away out of the window immediately. How I abhor this phrase with all its connotations. It seems to be saying to the student, you are too dim-witted to have got this when I, in all my efficiency and glory, offered it to you the first time. It also puts the blame on the learner for not getting whatever it is whatever it is that's right. This is not a great motivator. If indeed you did do this last week, then you might want to consider how U-shaped learning works. U-shaped learning is a process by which an item, structure, functional phrase, lexis, etc., is acquired. We know that there are many processes at play in that procedure. Amongst them, U-shaped learning, in which the item is well formed at the early stage and gradually drops off over time to then return to a well-formed version later on. We can encourage that process of U-shaped learning by referring to using and gently encouraging learners to use whatever it is we're focusing on. So trying to minimize error, as many teachers do, suggests that it's desirable not to make errors as a learner. It is. It also doesn't work, as evidenced in the relative failure of audiolingualism. Now back to our challenge in error management. Let's suppose that whatever you did, you decided that a spoken error should be managed on the spot. So let's look at one example of that, which is yesterday I go to London. Oh, egregious, right? Well, of course, you could argue that there's no need to correct this, but I'm not going to go into that. The standard teacher response, I mean, the traditional one would be to give the student the answer, thus apparently resolving the issue. Indeed, at times I've witnessed this kind of response. Right, okay, now we have a problem here because you've used the present tense of the verb to go, and what you really needed was the past tense, right? Past the verb to go is went, isn't it? Do you understand? So let's pick to pieces, just to be sure we're on the same page, as it were. This is a lengthy technical explanation of a simple error using forms and terminology which the student may or may not get. It's entirely redundant and actually doing more good, doing more damage than good. Freudian slip. And that final, do you understand, is really the icing on the cake. It's not a very well-made cake, and that icing is nonsense. Not a question which should ever be used in the classroom, and designed only to make the teacher feel good when all the students nod in unison. Do you understand? Yes, teacher. just to get you to shut up and move on. It serves no useful purpose and can be safely removed from every teacher's vocabulary. After all, if they've understood or not will become clear with time. But understanding doesn't mean the ability to use. It's that old declarative versus procedural information argument, which I've made in this forum more than once, so I won't repeat now. So anyway, what has this long rambling explanation by Mr. or Ms. A teacher achieved? Well, other than leaving the student probably more confused and less motivated, nothing at all. Instead, in the interests of challenge, I want to suggest a few ways in which students can be given the chance to shine. In the possible order that one might manage this, we start by showing recognition that an error worthy of attention has occurred. You can use a facial tick, a facial tick or a facial twitch, a raised eyebrow, a questioning look. That might be enough. If not, how many words in your sentence? Weird, right? But this odd question requires one to do what I call rewind. And more often than not, as this rewind occurs, when they go back over their utterance, they'll spot the error and put it right. If not, the challenge continues. Somebody might say, I've got four words in my sentence. I can say, well, you need 5. Or they say, I've got 5, and you say, you need 4, which causes them to calculate, to rewind, go back over it and try and put it right. Alternatively, I might try some apparently innocuous clarification. Where did you go? London. Again, this might work by removing the focus of right or wrong and putting it on interest instead. Help the learner to correct. If none of these works, I'm not giving up. You can try finger correction. It's a brilliant tool created by Caleb Gatenio. It's precise and accessible, and it's a way to have students rewind, focus, and change what they've said. Right palm towards you, start with the thumb and tick off the words from your right to your left, because your students, like you, are reading from their left to their right. Again, this isn't a forum to look at that in detail, but I believe that all error management techniques should be designed to challenge rather than simply to offer the answer. Let's talk for a moment about homework, written work in particular. Some of the most prescriptive and demotivating areas in ELT, if not handled with challenge in mind. I've already mentioned copying from the board and how you can easily make that activity into something useful and challenging. Now, what about homework? That's when the teacher says, okay, for homework, I want you to write 10 sentences using the present perfect. And is then surprised when students either don't bother or copy each other, or these days use AI or write uninspired sentences. Now, the challenge is not only to get learners thinking and working for themselves, it's also to have students stretch their own creativity in their quest for self-determination. I'm not, by the way, advocating for ELT to include creativity in its list of topic areas, a big discussion in the 1970s and 80s, but it might be that one can encourage creativity by default. So instead of the write 10 sentences which focus on a specific form or lexical item, imagine you're a small dog left outside a supermarket while the owner goes shopping. What can you see? What do you feel? Or perhaps you're a cloud traveling over a big city. What do you notice? Or last week you were at the beach. How was it? What did you see there? How was the whole experience? What did you do? Who did you meet? You see, I'm trying to get students to use various kinds of language, but without telling them to. They might just get into this and write more than you expect. But if they do the minimum, you can always ask what they didn't like about it and see what they say. So how do you deal with homework after the event? This is also important, since to get them to do something outside the classroom can be a challenge for the teacher too. Use peer interest. Who wants to read what somebody else wrote? And then as they look at each other's work, you can monitor from a distance. Please be aware that the hand in your homework is a demotivating way to work. I find it so negative, since it suggests that only you can judge their work. But you can also wander around while they're working with each other, asking interested questions. How was that? Did you enjoy it? What happened in your story? And as they complete this, any doubts, questions, in the hope that they'll bring up anything for which they need clarification. This is a hands-off approach designed to encourage and to create an open forum classroom where learners feel at ease and are able to ask and contribute and comment without fear. So what kind of a classroom or learning space do you really want? You will have understood that what I'm suggesting is rather liberal and rather non-interventionist and quite radical for teachers who might have been working in a strict school environment where the teacher is the center of attention and students aren't really expected to do anything or think for themselves. I've worked in such environments. I was a teaching assistant many years ago for a school in which the headmaster, who once caught me in the corridor, asked me why I was carrying a guitar into class. He told me classrooms are for serious learning. Of course, at the time, I was too young and unsure, too inexperienced to challenge his ridiculous comments, but I knew that he was wrong. Since then, I've often used live music in many different forms to engage students. I had them writing songs, I had them singing when they thought they couldn't, and so on. And there's no doubt in my mind that learning was enhanced by such experiences, even in the sense only of the dynamic of the classroom. A challenge is part of the fabric of an efficient and caring classroom. It's a thoughtful and thought-provoking way to have students gain in confidence. And when people gain in confidence, they also engage more readily, as well as producing results which are measurably better. I'm talking about classrooms in which the process of language acquisition and learning take precedence over the formal results or tests, as we like to call them. I'm talking about the subordination of teaching to learning, which is a principle of silent way promoted by Gattegno. What that means is that the focus of activity should be directed at the student. It also suggests, in a sense, that learning will take care of itself if all the other factors are in place. If all the other factors are in place and teachers are convinced that this is the way to work, then it will. It'll become automatic learning. You know, I hate these fancy terms that we're supposed to be using now for teachers, but here I think there's one which is actually relevant, and that is facilitate. Create the context for learning by providing subtle tools. Be confident that your learners can do more than you think, given the space and the encouragement. That's it. Thank you very much for getting involved. Thanks for following. I hope that you will access the website, Gallery Teachers website, where there are many wonderful things on offer. And I'll see you next time.